Apparently my talk is so important, so they're recording with two mics. So, a couple of words about myself, so just to share what I know, what I don't know. I worked for Google for about 8 years. We worked with Mark a lot, the first speaker. And in the last 3 years in Google, I was responsible for conducting all research on voice actions. It's basically when you say something and the system reacts. It doesn't just give you information, it does something to you. So I left Google about a year ago, and now I'm a company. We focus on voice research and building usability labs. So straight to the presentation. I'm going to go through all my slides as fast as possible because there are so many things I wanted to share that I'd rather spend more time on questions rather than just speaking about what I think is important. So the first one is, if you look at the description of a new voice product from any startup or a big company, it's always fantastic. It's going to finally bring the revolution into our society. It's going to change everything. As soon as you look at their real product, there's something wrong with that all the time. It might look cool or it might sound cool, but there is something wrong with it. Like, there is no real place in the world for that. And sometimes it's very difficult to put the finger on what's wrong, but this is why I've personally found user experience research for voice so interesting, because it's our job to put a finger on the problem and say, we can improve here or fix that. So in a couple of years working in voice, I tried to create a framework to either plan studies on what we can improve or to figure out what went wrong in the existing product. So one of the frameworks we used with Mark was that. So speaking about voice, by the way, I mostly speak about voice assistance. It's a thing that, again, not just give information, just to let you know, it can do something, which is a completely different thing. So what we found is that voice assistants usually basically an overlap of 3 areas. It must be natural. There must be a voice, like a real voice there, and it should be assistive. I'm going to go through all the bits, and I can share one thing one issue we found during our research, and one solution or one recommendation we can give. By the way, if you look at most of the real product launched right now from all kind of companies, in most of the cases you can find that at least one of the parts is either neglected or at least not supported properly. Like, for example, and it's very easy to do any 2 things. Like, for example, if you want to create just voice assistant without paying attention to the natural part, we can do it like in 10 seconds. Just open a development environment, open any speech-to-text system, and just speaking C++ or Java. And the computer can do anything you want. You can control any device in the world. It doesn't work, unfortunately, because the natural part is missing. So I'm going to go through all of them and talk about each. So first one is voice. So what was interesting when I started to conduct studies on voice is that we found that it's so much difficult to understand what's going on in the user head because voice is invisible, right? Unlike with a real system, like a traditional system, when you have GUI, graphic user interface is like a mirror of what's going on in the user head, because we don't see that, but we see the immediate and direct response to that. Like, for example, when people look at the screen and they don't understand what's going on, we can see exactly what they do. Like, they click that button and they're happy or they're not happy. Like, it looks like a mirror. With voice, the mirror is invisible as well. So they hear something that we cannot hear. They create a mental model that we cannot see, and then they respond to that in a way that we don't understand. So basically, we sit in between and try to figure out what's going on. One solution to that we found is that it's really important to, as the previous speaker said, it's really important to conduct as many studies as possible and to do it as fast as possible. There are a couple of caveats there. The first one is that I tried to do it myself, and I saw a lot of other researchers trying to do that. It's the first question you have is how to prototype your voice assistant, because there aren't a lot of tools around. There are literally none. Like, if you want to build something, it's very difficult to test if it actually makes sense. So we tried to do that thing. We tried to bring the participant and tell them, just imagine that I'm not here, I'm just voice. And talk to me like you talk to a voice assistant, and another researcher can sit and analyze the process. And we quickly realized that it just doesn't work. For the reason that Caroline mentioned, is that as soon as people see you, like we are biologically designed to read a lot of information from the posture, from the body language, from the face, from how the voice sounds, is that even before the people start talking to a person, they make a lot of assumptions, and the process and exactly how they speak is so much different when they speak to a system. So we quickly realized that it doesn't work. We started to think about, okay, how can we prototype? So the best approach that we found is the Wiz of Oz prototyping tool, is when you have actually two researchers. One researcher is invisible. They sit somewhere in the observation room. They can see everything what's going on in the usability lab. And they have control, basically 20 buttons or a text entry field, where they can hear what participants ask, and they quickly type and press enter, and the system in front of the participant, it says, oh, the weather tomorrow is going to be great. Right now, it's actually pretty easy to do that. You can, like, for example, if you design anything for Alexa, you can connect to Alexa as a Bluetooth speaker, and you can have your computer, and you can take any text-to-speech system. Like, for example, it can be a Google Translator. There are two fields there. You enter your text in one field, and there's a feature to speak it aloud. So you speak it aloud, and the user in a different room, if you connect through Bluetooth, will hear that voice. So you can either have a list of kind of predefined responses, or you can experiment and you can change any response on the fly. It's usually not as easy because it requires some skills and kind of quickly selecting what you need to say and selecting, putting in the different field, click on play, but it works. Very interesting that we've been conducting studies, such kind of studies, for 3 years. Nobody's, like from the participant side, nobody suspected there was a human sitting somewhere and controlling the thing. Everybody believed that it's a real system. Probably because everyone had so many issues with voice in general. So for example, even if there is a delay, like a minute delay, people are fine with that. In the beginning of the study, we can say it's a prototype and there might be connectivity issues, so please be patient with us. And people are. So basically the main advice here, prototype as fast as possible and as many as possible. The second thing, the second dimension of the voice is that it's conversational. And think about yourself how you order coffee, for example, in a cafe. You go there, you look at the menu, or how you order anything from the menu, and you start, I'll take this thing, then you ask a question, how good is it? And then you switch to something else, and you want to add something there. And it's just the easiest conversation possible. You have a menu. You cannot order anything else. And there is a direct kind of path from point A to point B, and everybody understands that. Everybody shares that concept. It's still very conversational. Think about anything even slightly more complex, and it's going to be extended in time, very kind of back and forth process, and very, very flexible. If you look at any system released at the moment, it's not like that. In most of the cases, it's just question and answer. As far as I understand, Google Home is the most flexible technology at the moment, but still, it's a straightforward process. You can go back in some cases, but it's not like when you talk to a human. So, one example from the studies, for example, if you think about the simplest thing you can ask, and in my experience, when all big companies started to work on voice, the first feature they launched was weather. How good is going to be the weather? What's the weather tomorrow? And they're designed usually by a bunch of designers sitting in a room and thinking about in what questions you can ask about weather. And if you stretch high enough, it's like five different options. So developers go to the computers, they make a code for everything. So it's basically a formula with multiple arguments, and the formula is waiting for you to fill in all the slots. When we went to the usability lab and started to see how people ask those questions, so during the first study, we asked the participant to ask about the weather, and she asked in a way that designers just forgot to enter there. And they said, okay, we forgot one thing. So they added one extra thing to the list. They went to developers. Developers went through the process. It was launched. Yeah, it started to work. I conducted studies for almost 3 years, and almost at every study, we asked that question about the weather. It was our warm-up question. And every single time, developers or designers sitting in the observation room, they were like, damn, we forgot about that thing too. So every single time, something doesn't work. And it's the simplest question you can ask. And we quickly realized how flexible and kind of adapting and adjusting human language is, and people behave, how flexible people behave in different situations. And it's almost impossible to support even the simplest option with just having a list of questions, just implementing that and waiting that everybody is going to work. It's not. It's a completely different story. If you look at the success rate, if you look at any quant data, you'll see that such kind of questions have very high success rate, but it's not because they work. It's the other way around. It's because we as humans are very adjustable to what we hear. So people learn that it just doesn't work. So they stick to one or two options how they manage to make it working. It's like, what can be an example? If you talk to your pet, like if your dog is looking at you, you're not going to ask, I wonder what I need to do with my life starting from today. It's mostly like, sit, and it's going to sit. And the success rate is very high, but it's not because the dog is very smart. So the recommendation here, what I personally learned, is that we need to experiment with, basically we need to organize the studies, and we need to conduct studies on things we don't expect. There are so many things that we learned when we just, me and Mark, we sat in the usability lab and we had like 2 hours. We quickly recruited participants. They came to the lab and we just started to ask random questions. We tried to change something during the With or False prototype and just see how people reacted. And it was fantastic how many things most of the things that we implemented, we didn't expect them. It was just something that we noticed. Like a couple of examples I can give. It's very interesting when you combine voice with what you see on the screen. It's a multimodal process. Like for example, we were working on a user interface when you tell the system, call someone, and the system makes a call for you. So it's the simplest interaction possible. And we know that in some cases there can be misrecognition, especially when it comes to people names. So before the system actually placed the call, we had a couple of seconds kind of idle screen where there was a process bar saying that I'm going to call that person from your phone book. So if you're happy with that, you don't need to do anything. The call will be placed in 3 seconds. And you see the progress bar going. When it reaches the end, it places the call. As soon as we thought that speed is very important, so we had one extra button, speed it up. And it was a grayish screen with a big green button, speed it up, because we thought this is what's important. And there were a couple of studies conducted for that interface a couple of months ago, and everything worked. We just sat with Mark and we thought, there's something wrong with that. Like we need to do more. So we started to see how people reacted to that. And in one of the studies, it was almost at the end of the study. So we had like 5 minutes to the end. And we said, sorry, we have only 5 minutes to the participant. So you need to, like, we're going to quickly ask you one question. And we saw how her reaction changed. We saw that in that kind of speed up mode, she started to react differently. So we created a completely different study. We tested our product in the panic mode. It's when you actually don't have a luxury of sitting in a quiet usability lab, holding your phone with both screens, paying full attention to that device, and just expecting one action to happen. What we did, we said, okay, so you're going to place a call, and you're going to call, let's say, Larry Sage, your friend. The system is going to misrecognize what you said, and it's going to start calling Larry Page, the CEO of Google. and it's 5 p.m. in London and it's 3 a.m. in San Francisco, so you probably don't want that to happen. So you want to stop that as fast as possible. Are you ready? Go. Here we go. And the process of kind of pushing us and putting the emotional pressure there, it's completely changed how people reacted. So we tested 10 people, and all 10 people, every single user, clicked on the most prominent thing on the screen, which was speed up. So we changed how the system worked both voice-wise and screen-wise. Basically what we did, we added another prominent thing. We made it red. We made the green thing slightly less visible, because we realized that for a lot of voice actions, and voice action, unlike voice search, is something that the system is going to do with you. It's going to affect your life somehow. So you delegate your responsibility to that thing. You need to trust it. You need to believe that it's going to work properly. So we realized that for those cases, trust is far more important than speed, for example. And speed is very actually difficult to measure. Like, for example, if you place a call, though it can be important to make it as fast as possible, would you prefer to work in like 90% of the cases, so it's only every 10th person is wrong, or 99% cases but a couple of seconds slower is the most preferable option? So it's probably the second. The next one. So a couple of things that I mentioned already is that asking to do something with your life is completely different with asking for information. I remember we had a participant in the usability lab, and we showed her the virtual assistant that lived in her phone, and she said, "Oh, it's just fantastic. I didn't even know that it was there. I used my phone for 5 years before that." So she said, "Oh, I'm going to tell it my daughter. She will love it. I'm going to talk to all my colleagues over the week. And on the weekend, I'm going to the pub and I'm going to talk about that to all my friends." And we're like, "Oh, that's great. We can test how people on board." So it was the first time she liked it. She was going to use it. And I asked, "So you're going to use this system?" And she said, "Absolutely not." And we're like, "Well, you just said you liked it." And she said, "Yeah, but I just tried it once, and then the second time, and once it worked, another one it didn't. And I don't understand why. So I don't know when and how to trust the system, when to don't trust the system. And my life is important for me, so it's going to affect me personally. Of course I'm not going to use it. It's a nice thing as a toy, but not something that I'm going to bring into my life and delegate some responsibility, because at the end of the day, I'm responsible for that." Like her use case was, she forgot about the birthday of her partner. Like she said she didn't forget. She just was too busy, so it was came unexpectedly. So she said, "I don't want it to happen ever." And we asked, "Do you want to use voice to create a reminder?" And she asked, "Okay, I can do that, but what kind of reminder is going to create? Is it going to be alarm clock that I definitely hear, text message somehow, or a small pop-up on your notification bar, which I don't like?" And as soon as you don't understand exactly how it's going to work, people don't trust it, don't trust the system. So the last bit is more organizational one. Is what we found is that in many cases, voice. So if you think about all three overlapping areas, each one changes the product significantly. If you add all of them, in many cases, it's voice is a technology that changes the product significantly. And that means that in many cases, the biggest barrier to a new product is not that we don't know what to do. The biggest barrier is the old product and the whole organization created around that product. Like people know what the problem is with the old system. Teams are created to deal with that problem with the old system. And in many cases, when we work with companies that want something voice related, they have a system where you can sit in the office and you say, "I want to create a reminder for tomorrow to call Bob." And it puts the reminder of exactly when you want as a developer and say, "Yeah, it works technology-wise." So, but for some reason, people don't use that. You're a UX person, just go outside and figure out what's the small thing we need to do. And then when you conduct all the studies, you figure out all those three areas. You understand what exactly needs to be changed there. And you come back saying that your product can be great, but you need to change it dramatically. People say, no. It almost works. The investment or the promotion, it's almost around the corner. We can launch it next week. What small change we need to make? And in many cases, unfortunately, the answer is that it's not about a small change. It's about all those three areas. None of them are technical. It's exactly the user experience issue that we can solve as user experience researchers and designers. But organizational-wise, it's very, very difficult for that reason. Technology-wise, it's almost there. Thank you very much, and if we have time for questions.
Any questions? Any questions? One on here.
I love the panic mode user testing. I actually think it'd be great for like any app testing, right? Any other kind of suggestions for the benefits of accelerating the pressure in user testing? Or other examples?
I'm trying to figure out what I can share, and
It's okay, we won't tell anybody. We'll put it on YouTube.
So another example from unexpected things we found during studies was we didn't realize how subtle can be the clue that people read. I can give one example. So there was a system where you create a message and you want to send to someone, and the system, on the confirmation step, it can say, do you want to send it? Or another option was, what do you want to do? From my perspective, it's completely the same. When we started to conduct studies, we saw that in the first option, people thought that, okay, the system is asking, do you want to send it? That means that it expects yes/no question. That means that it's not smart enough to understand anything else. So people start saying, no, the system goes, what do you want to do? Change the name. To what name do you want to change? To Mike. Do you want to do anything else? Yes. What? Change the text. What changed? And so on. So it was like a step-by-step process. And another option, as soon as the system asked, what do you want to do? People thought that, okay, it's smart enough to understand natural language. So in the second option, they started to say, it changed the name to Mike and change the text to that thing and send it in 4 hours. So it was completely accident that we found it. It was during those experiments when we just fooled around and we thought to see how people reacted. And it's fascinating that such a tiny difference on the technological side, as soon as people don't have a face to read, they don't have a voice to read, people quickly understand that it's just fake. Regardless of how great the voice sounds, they cannot draw any conclusions from, is it friendly or not? Like what Caroline said, the first impression can be important, but people very quickly to figure out what it actually can do. And they start to read some other subtle clues, like for example, how quickly it reacts, or do I actually understand what it says, or do I actually understand how it's going to behave later? And for me, it was a very interesting example of how subtle change can be that people react dramatically.
Any more questions? Oh, just one over there. Hold on.
I'm just curious, when you do these studies, were they laying down in English with native English speakers, or how do you go about the culture aspect?
About the cultural aspect, it's a very interesting question because I started with lab studies, and it's mostly people living in London. But again, even in, London it's not one city. It's like a lot of small cities and a lot of small overlapping areas. So that was interesting. As soon as we broke that circle, and as soon as I remember, I conducted in 2 weeks, I interviewed about 50 people just all over Europe, mostly remotely, and as soon as you start seeing how people living in different countries interact with voice, it's just a completely different story. Like, for example, we had people who live in the Netherlands. They came there from Greece, and they mostly speak English because they work for an English-speaking company. And most of their contacts is still, like in their phone book, is still in Greek. All the local information they look for, they either use English or some other like local language. As soon as they do anything work-related, they use English mostly. And for them, it's almost impossible to understand what they need to do to make the system to understand them. And the best case scenario that they found is that just change all the names in their phone book to English pronunciation. Like, literally change the people names, because there are names outside of their English culture that is just no alternative in the English language. So I'm going to call a friend whose actually name is Vasily to Bob, and I'm going to memorize that. I'm going to call Bob, and it works, which is kind of the opposite goal of the voice interface, where you don't need to think about anything. Now you need to think about more things.
Oh, one more question here.
So I was very interested by what you were saying about how introducing more steps to kind of feel that safety of knowing that that would actually work is probably more important than the speed. And one of the things I've noticed recently on the change for the Apple Watch is now when you say like text someone, it just says like, okay, I'll text them, and it says, you know, it's doing it as opposed to what it used to say, which is like, is it okay for me to text it? It's kind of like going under this default thing of now saying like, oh no, I'll do that, and if you have a problem with me doing that, stop me from doing it. It's kind of like that panic thing again. And that's kind of a big change from should I proceed, you know, and they've removed that step, but you know, it's almost like this like waiting point of saying like, oh, like actually I don't know if I want you to do that, and then you start panicking, and when we start like, if you're assured that you know that that is going to actually be an okay interaction, can we like leverage that kind of danger zone of saying like, oh, actually it is correct, I'll let them do that, and if it gets more better and better, can you use that kind of like that moment where the user actually says like, oh, actually this technology is getting smarter, I feel comfortable letting it do that for me now. Those little things, we just push it a little bit further.
That's a very good question, and it took me personally almost a year to realize that such things as trust are very important. So I conducted a lit review to try to understand, because trust is one of the fundamental things that we all understand what it is. So I conducted a lit review, and I literally didn't find anything that can be useful for, like, practical for implementing in specific products. So me and Mark, we started to conduct studies on trust. And one of the things we found after I left Google was that kind of there is, when we build trust, there is kind of a ladder of trust, right? And we very slowly, or a system or a person, very slowly climbs up to the ladder. One successful step can bring you a little bit higher. One error can bring you much, much lower. So it's first thing. The second thing is that not all actions are equal in terms of their user cost. Like, for example, making a phone call to someone is actually has one of the highest social prices, because you need to do something with another human being. You can either say what's actually happened, and it sounds foolish, like I tried to use voice and it didn't work, so that's why I'm talking to you, bye-bye. Or you need to make up an excuse which make you feel bad. So one error in that specific action brings your trust like significantly lower. In many cases, just full fail user once, they're never going to use it again. There are less stressful features. Technology-wise, they might be much more complicated. And in many cases, the product teams, they don't pay attention to that difference between, oh, that's a huge feature that we just worked for a year, so that's why it's so important. For users, it can be completely different. So one of the ideas is, if you can identify features that don't hurt users, maybe these are the features that you want to start with kind of onboarding process, because if it didn't work, that's not a big deal. Another thing is, it's interesting how trust is completely different from technology supporting that. In many cases, so basically, what trust is? Trust is the opposite of control, right? You either control everything and then you do the thing. You don't delegate, or you trust the system and then you delegate your responsibility and you trust the thing that is going to do with you exactly what you want. And we interviewed a couple of human assistants to understand how they gain trust. And they said that it's, first of all, it's one of the most important characteristics of their interaction. And the second thing, they said something that I didn't expect, that completely changed how I saw the virtual assistant. They said that a good personal assistant is not a person who does exactly what you tell them. Because the biggest problem most of the people have in the world now is not that they want to delegate something to someone. The biggest problem is that you have so many things you need to think about that they just compete in your head. Like there are 20 things now probably that compete for your attention in your head, and people just keep forgetting. So a good personal assistant is the person who can take that responsibility, can take a couple of those competing things from your head and just deal with them themselves. You never worry about that again. You never worry about missing a train or missing birthday of your partner or anything. You know that it's covered. That's fine. And that changed my understanding how I see a virtual assistant, because in most of the cases, a physical thing that we build, a virtual assistant, is something that we tell them what to do, and they do exactly that small bit, which is not an assistant at all. Assistant would be, you tell that, for example, that I want to lose weight, or for example, I want to get promoted, or I want to lose weight. I want to go to bed not later than 1 a.m. And the system actually starts kind of dictating you what to do. The system starts reminding you about the steps. It's kind of, a couple of personal assistants said that a good assistant, they swap roles with their managers. As soon as they understand what the managers wanted to do, they started to dictate them what exactly the next step you need to do to achieve that. And this is, I personally think, the biggest problem we have with technology at the moment, because we're not even close to that case, and we're not getting closer. If you look at all tools at the moment, like Alexa, for example, there are more than, I think, 20,000 skills at the moment, Alexa skills at the moment. None of them take any cognitive load from you. You need to remember more to use them. You need to remember to activate the tool. You need to remember to use that tool. You need to learn your lines how to talk to that tool. So it's not making your life easier in a kind of a cognitive way. It makes your life more complicated. And it's not a virtual assistant, it's the opposite.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we good. Okay.